He began with hands that drew and hands that fired. José Vermeersch was born in Bissegem in 1922, and from early on he carried a single, persistent question: how can the human figure hold a life in clay? He trained at the Royal Academy in Kortrijk, where drawing taught him exactness, the discipline of line, and the patience of the eye. But his work found its fullest voice when it moved into the kiln, when two-dimensional drafting became the three-dimensional companionship of limbs and presence. Vermeersch's figures are attentive rather than grand. They hold ordinary weight, a shoulder's slope, the way a neck meets light, a hand that remembers work. He worked in terracotta, ceramic, and bronze, and he painted finishes that complicate what we expect from fired clay. There is a central paradox in his making: surfaces that look soft or fragile, but are the product of extreme heat and careful engineering. To fire life-size figures, he built kilns, robust, wood-fired chambers that demanded choreography, loading, stoking, watching, letting cool. Those kilns became more than equipment, they were communal events. Neighbors, students, and assistants gathered at the firing, turning production into ritual. The work's meaning is not only in the finished object, but in the social labor that brought it into being. Across decades, he moved between painting and sculpture, always returning to the figure as his primary language. His sculptures read like conversations between maker and model, measured, restrained, humane. Technique was never a private trick. It was a public service. His wood-fired kilns in Reninge and Lendelede were answers to a problem he set himself: how to make large, fragile things endure. That willingness to build infrastructure, to think of studio architecture, tools, and helpers, is part of his artistic gesture. Look closely and you see the theatrical choices: painted washes, latex skins, patinas that let ceramic read sometimes like skin, sometimes like cloth, sometimes like weathered stone. These finishes invite hesitation. Is it brittle or enduring? The viewer must decide. His figures invite closeness at scale. A life-size head or group asks the viewer to step nearer, to find an angle where a painted eye catches light, where a jawline throws a small shadow. That slowing, the small fracture in hurried movement, is the work's quiet success. His work traveled beyond Belgian workshops. Exhibitions in Europe and internationally brought his practice to new audiences, but always the studio in Lendelede remained the heart of his making. Today, that studio survives as a preserved atelier and archive, a built record of how he chose to work. To film his work, show process as well as object. Film the kiln being built and loaded, the slow insertion of a torso, hands that smooth the surface. Let the camera move with the maker's rhythm rather than trying to explain everything at once. Sound matters. The hollow tap of clay, the hush as a kiln door closes, the distant murmur of people waiting for the reveal. These register what images alone cannot. His art also asks ethical questions through form. Which bodies deserve presence in public spaces? How do we mark ordinary lives without spectacle? How might grief or tenderness find a place in sculpture? In later years and after his death in 1997, renewed attention to his archive and centenary retrospectives have deepened our understanding of his technical courage and social practice. Scholars and curators now emphasize that his contribution is not only made objects, but the networks and the studio that made them possible. What does it feel like, in person, to meet one of his works? First, an optical hesitation. A surface redirects the eye. Then the body answers. A tilt, a step closer, the pause that turns walking into attention. These are small civic moments, not grand narratives, but invitations to stay. The success of Vermeersch's work is measured in those pauses. An old hand resting at the edge of a bench, a child's reflection in a glaze, a neighbor recognizing a likeness. When you speak of him, be precise and modest. Pick one face, one hand, one kiln scene. Describe it slowly. The arts lesson is not a thesis to be announced, but a habit to be learned. How to look without rushing. Credit the institutions that care for his work and archives. The Atelier José Vermeersch, the galleries and the museums that have preserved his pieces. Request permissions for images and honor the stewardship those institutions provide. Above all, let the narration be patient. Let silence hold an image so the viewer can breathe the work in. The artist's central teaching is enacted in an interval, the space between seeing and understanding. José Vermeersch made figures that teach us to attend. He transformed technical knowledge into social ritual and made the human figure a place to practice empathy and care. Stand near one of his sculptures. Notice how the kiln's memory sits inside the surface. Follow a painted cheek with your eye. Let the world slow. That small slowing, patient, exact, and humane, is the measure of his work. José Vermeersch asked us to hold faces and histories with care. In doing so, he left a quiet, enduring lesson that attention itself can be a form of making.